My brother poured rocks into our teacher's gas tank at 9 years old, and my mom looked that principal dead in the eyes and said it was me, because she needed one perfect son to show off, and I was the one she chose to sacrifice. The principal's office smelled like old coffee and carpet cleaner. I remember that specifically because I sat in that chair for 45 minutes waiting for my mom to arrive, and I had nothing to do but stare at the motivational posters on the wall and breathe in that stale, particular smell. I was 7 years old. I had not touched Mrs. Hargrove's car. I had never even thought about touching Mrs. Hargrove's car. I didn't fully understand what a fuel tank was. But Principal Dunbar had called my mom and said my name, and so here I was, feet dangling off the chair because they didn't reach the floor, waiting for someone to come fix this obvious mistake. My mom walked in at 3:47 in the afternoon. I remember the clock above the door. She was still in her work clothes, the navy blazer she wore when she had meetings, her hair pulled back tight. She looked put together. She looked like someone whose children did not vandalize teacher property. She looked at me once when she walked in. Just once. Something passed across her face that I couldn't name at 7. I can name it now. It was calculation. Principal Dunbar explained that someone had poured gravel and small rocks into Mrs. Hargrove's gas tank over the course of 5 consecutive school days. The damage was extensive. The engine was ruined. Mrs. Hargrove was looking at over $3,000 in repairs or a total loss on a car she'd owned for 11 years. A student had been identified by 2 separate witnesses. My mom looked at Principal Dunbar. She didn't look at me. I understand, she said. We'll make this right. I waited for her to say it wasn't me. I actually leaned forward in the chair because I thought maybe she just hadn't gotten to that part yet. The part where she said her younger son was homesick that whole week, which I was. The part where she said Marcus was the one who walked past the staff parking lot every day after school, which he did. The part where she said there had clearly been a mistake. She didn't say any of that. She signed the suspension form, shook Principal Dunbar's hand, steered me out of that office by the back of my collar like I was a dog on a leash. In the car, I said, "Mom, I didn't do it." She turned the radio on. We were a particular kind of family, the kind that looked perfect from the outside and required a great deal of maintenance to keep it that way. My mom, Denise, had grown up the eldest of 4 siblings in a household in Gary, Indiana, where money was tight and appearances were everything. She had clawed her way to a marketing director position at a mid-size healthcare company in Columbus, Ohio. She drove a clean car. She kept a clean house. She wore pressed clothes to school meetings and made deviled eggs from scratch for every church potluck. She had 2 sons, Marcus James and me, Adrian James. Marcus was 9 when this happened. I was 7. On paper, we were equals. In practice, we had never been. Marcus was quiet in the way that fooled adults. He spoke carefully around teachers and relatives, chose his words the way someone chooses clothes for a job interview. He had dark, careful eyes and a way of sitting very still when adults were watching. He learned early that stillness looked like goodness. It did not feel like goodness from the inside of our bedroom, where the same boy who smiled at our grandmother over Sunday dinner would steal the money from my birthday card and tell me if I said anything he'd break my Game Boy, which he had done once before, so I believed him. I was louder. I asked more questions. I laughed in church and fidgeted during long car rides, and once accidentally broke a lamp playing indoor football when I had been explicitly told not to play indoor football. The kind of child that requires more patience. The kind that gets noticed for the wrong reasons in ways that compound over time. My mom had made a decision somewhere before my memory begins. Marcus was the one she could display. I was the one she managed. That first lie, the one in Dunbar's office, I think she told herself it was a one-time correction, a practical choice. Marcus had a better disciplinary record. A suspension on his file might have impacted some future thing she was already planning for him in her head. I was already messy. One more mark wouldn't change the picture that much. She told herself that. I am certain of it. What she didn't account for was what that moment taught Marcus. He was 9 years old. He had just watched his mother look a principal in the eyes and hand his brother the consequences for something he did. He didn't get a speech about responsibility. He didn't get a private talk about how this could never happen again. He got away with it completely, and the world kept moving. For a 9-year-old with the psychology Marcus already had, that was not a lesson about luck. It was a proof of concept. The next 2 years were quiet in the way that things are quiet before you understand what's building. Marcus tested the edges occasionally. A missing $5 here, a broken household item that I got blamed for there. Each time, my mom accepted the narrative that painted me as the careless one, the difficult one, the one most likely to have done it. I learned to keep my room neat and my voice calm and to document things the way no 10-year-old should have to think to document things. I kept a composition notebook under my mattress, not because I had a plan, just because something in me recognized even then that I was going to need proof someday. I wrote down dates and amounts. September 14th, Marcus took $11 from the kitchen drawer. Mom blamed me. No consequence. November 2nd, Marcus broke the laundry room window with a baseball. Told Mom I did it. Lost my outdoor privileges for 3 weeks. The notebook filled slowly. I never showed it to anyone. Then I turned 11, and Marcus took $40 from my mother's wallet. This was not petty anymore. $40 in our house was grocery money. It was the kind of loss that made my mom's face go tight at the checkout line, recounting her cash. She noticed immediately. She came into the living room where both of us were watching television, and she asked where the money was. Marcus looked at me. Not at her, at me. A very small, very deliberate look. Adrian had his hand in your purse earlier, he said. I saw him. I had not touched her purse. I had been sitting on the couch for the past 2 hours. I said exactly that calmly, in my most 11-year-old responsible voice. My mom walked to my room, didn't search it, didn't ask follow-up questions. She found my gaming console, a used PlayStation 2 I'd saved birthday money for 2 years to afford, unplugged it from the wall, put it under her arm, and sold it at the pawn shop on Parsons Avenue the next morning for $35. I sat in my room that evening. The wall where the console had been still had the little scuff mark from when I'd first set it up and misjudged the distance. I stared at that scuff mark for a long time. I thought about the composition notebook. I thought about taking it to my mom, showing her the pattern, making her see it. I didn't, because I already understood at 11 that evidence was not the problem. My mom was not failing to see the truth. She was choosing not to. That is a different and much harder thing to fight. I started planning my exit that night. Not in any concrete way. I was 11, but I decided something. I would get through school. I would keep my grades up. I would get a scholarship somewhere far from Columbus, and I would build a life where nobody had a pre-existing verdict about who I was. That plan was clean and quiet and reasonable. Marcus would not let me have it. By the time I was 14 and Marcus was 16, the lying had matured. It had technique now. He didn't just deny things or redirect blame. He constructed narratives. He seeded versions of events before the events even fully unfolded, so that by the time you heard the story from someone else, Marcus's version was already load-bearing. I had a girlfriend at 14. Her name was Priya. She was smart and funny, and she laughed with her whole face in a way that made the whole room feel different. We had been together for 4 months, which is forever when you're 14. Marcus was seeing a girl named Keisha from the 11th grade. He was also, as it turned out, seeing a girl named Destiny behind the gym at least twice a week. Priya's friend Jasmine caught them, took a video on her phone, sent it to every group chat she was in, which covered roughly 240 students. Marcus's phone lit up immediately. What he did next was something I have spent years trying to understand. He didn't deny the video. He didn't apologize. He didn't disappear for a few days and let it blow over. Within 3 hours of the video going out, he had rebuilt the story completely. He told people the boy in the video was me, that I had been messing around with someone while Priya thought I was loyal. The footage was blurry, shot from a distance. I was 14 and Marcus was 16, but we were close enough in height and build that it was deniable enough. He had been banking on that. Within 2 days, Priya stopped responding to my messages. Her friends stopped making eye contact with me in the hallway. A girl I'd never spoken to came up to me at lunch and said, "You're disgusting." My own mother called me into the kitchen that Saturday morning and told me she was disappointed in me, said she'd raised me better, said cheating was a sin and a character flaw, and that she was ashamed. I said, "Mom, it wasn't me, it was Marcus." She said, "Marcus doesn't have a girlfriend," which was true, technically, in the same way that a lot of things Marcus did were technically deniable. I called Priya's number for the last time that Sunday. She didn't pick up. I wrote her a letter, the physical kind, and slid it through the slot in her locker. I don't know if she ever read it. We never spoke again after that. She transferred schools the following semester. I heard she did well. I hope she did well. What that incident did to my reputation was surgical. Our family went to the same church as half my extended family. Aunts, uncles, cousins who attended the same Sunday service, heard the same gossip in the same church parking lots. We were a family that treated faithfulness as a core value. People who cheated were a particular kind of broken. Within a month, I had become that kind of broken to every person who shared my last name. My Aunt Carolyn stopped inviting me to her house. My cousin Dion, who I had grown up playing basketball with every Thanksgiving, stopped texting me back. I was 14 years old and I had been exiled from my own family based on a blurry video that wasn't me. I stopped fighting it. I had learned, slowly and completely, that fighting it only made it worse. Every denial looked like guilt. Every attempt to explain the pattern made me sound paranoid. The smarter play was silence and distance. Keep your grades up. Stay out of the way. Get out of Columbus. I did that for the next 2 years. Junior year, I had a 3.8 GPA and a list of schools I was applying to. I worked weekends at a sporting goods store on East Broad Street. I came home, did my homework, and went to sleep. I gave Marcus and my mother the smallest possible surface area. I had 13 months left. Then Marcus did something that I could not survive the way I had survived the rest. There was a party in October of my junior year. I didn't go. I had work that night and a paper due Monday. I know this because I have the time-stamped receipts from the register at that sporting goods store and the document file on my laptop that shows I was editing that paper at 11:47 p.m. I have always kept records. Old habit. A girl named Simone was at that party. She was a junior at a different school. She woke up the next morning with no memory of the previous 4 hours and bruising she couldn't explain. She told a friend. The friend told others. The story moved the way those stories move, in whispers first, then louder, then very loud. Marcus had been at that party. People had seen him with Simone. I heard the whispers by Tuesday. They were were coming from a specific direction, and they carried a specific detail that made my stomach drop. They didn't say Marcus's name, they said mine. I found out later, from a sophomore named Terrell, who had nothing to gain from telling me, that Marcus had spent the weekend running a version of that night in which I had been the one seen with Simone. He'd told 5 people individually, each time framing it as something he didn't want to spread but felt obligated to share. 5 people became 20. 20 became the whole school. By Wednesday morning, I was walking through hallways where people stepped back from me, not quickly, deliberately. By Thursday, I had received 47 messages across 3 platforms. Some were threats, some were just one word. One of them had a photo of a gun. I did not go to the police because I was 16 and black and alone, and I had already learned what institutions did with complaints from boys who looked like me when the accusation pointed in the other direction. On Friday afternoon, someone punched me from behind in the parking lot. I didn't see who. I went down on the asphalt and got up and walked home and didn't tell anyone. That weekend, I woke up Saturday morning to a notification. An Instagram account with no profile photo and nearly 300 followers, built in days, which meant people had been actively sharing it, had posted my home address, my phone number, my email address, and a description of what I had supposedly done to Simone that was detailed and specific and completely fabricated. The account bio said justice. I sat on the edge of my bed and I read it 3 times because part of me was waiting to find some detail that would make it less real. There was no such detail. I thought about the composition notebook under my mattress. I thought about my 3.8 GPA and the college applications I was 3 weeks from submitting. I thought about 13 months. I thought about how none of it mattered if I was not alive to see it. I opened my contacts. I scrolled through every name: my mom, Marcus, extended family who hadn't spoken to me in 2 years, friends who had stopped being friends when the rumors started. There was one contact I had never deleted. I don't know why I kept it. Sentimentality, maybe, or some part of me that hadn't fully given up. My dad. His name in my phone was still just Dad. I had not spoken to him in 9 years. My mom had told me about his drinking when I was 8, about the night he put his hands on her, about why the divorce was not negotiable. I had believed her. There had been no reason not to. I believed her right up until the moment I had no one else to call. I pressed the contact. It rang twice. Hello? His voice was older, careful, like he was already afraid of what the call might mean. I said, Dad, it's Adrian. A pause. Then, Adrian. The way he said it was not surprise. It was something else, like a door he had been standing outside for years had finally opened. I need help, I said. I don't have anyone else. Where are you right now? He asked. Home. I'm sending you an Uber. Come now. Don't pack. Just come. I left 4 minutes later. I walked out the front door without telling my mom. I was halfway down the block when I saw 4 cars I didn't recognize parked up the street, engine running, a group of older boys standing outside them with the specific energy of people who have decided to do something. They were looking at our house. They didn't see me. I walked in the other direction, got in the Uber, and did not look back. My dad lived in an apartment in Clintonville. 3rd floor, clean and spare, books on every surface. When he opened the door, he looked at me for a long moment, this 16-year-old version of the 7-year-old he had last known, and then pulled me in and held on. He didn't ask what happened. He didn't ask why I'd waited 9 years. He just walked me to the couch, found the remote, and put on the Polar Express. It was October, but he put it on anyway, because I had told him once, when I was 5, that it was my favorite, and he had apparently kept that. Tom Hanks started narrating, and I started crying. Not quietly. The kind of crying that comes from somewhere deep and old and has very little to do with the present moment. I couldn't speak. I shoved my phone in his face and showed him the post. He read it twice. Set the phone down on the coffee table very carefully, the way you set something down when you're working to control your hands. He looked at me. Son, he said, I know you wouldn't do that. 9 words. I had been waiting to hear some version of those 9 words since I was 7 years old, sitting in a principal's office with my feet not reaching the floor, waiting for my mom to tell the truth. I completely fell apart. He held my shoulders through the worst of it, and when I could breathe again, he said, I'm gonna need you to tell me everything, from the beginning. So I did. 2.5 hours. I started with the rocks in Mrs. Hargrove's gas tank, and I went forward chronologically, including the composition notebook and the PlayStation and Priya and Dion not texting me back. My dad filled 3 pages of a yellow legal pad in handwriting I recognized, even after 9 years, as his. He asked quiet, specific questions. He didn't editorialize. He didn't tell me what he thought about my mother. He just took notes. When I finished, he sat back and looked at what he'd written. Okay, he said. The next morning, I woke to the smell of butter and syrup. He slid a plate of pancakes in front of me without asking if I was hungry and disappeared into his home office. I heard him on the phone. Not the words, just the register. Steady, deliberate, the voice of someone who knows what they're doing. He came out an hour later with more notes and a look I hadn't seen before. Quiet and resolved in a specific way that made me set down my fork. I'm getting some people involved, he said. You're going to be okay. That afternoon, a woman named Catherine arrived. Late 30s, laptop bag over one shoulder, sharp eyes that did a quick scan of the apartment when she came in before settling on me. She worked in IT security, my dad explained. Freelance. She asked to see the Instagram post. She asked to see every message, every threat, every account that had tagged or shared the original post. She connected my my phone to her laptop and ran programs for 40 minutes while my dad and I sat in the kitchen. She came in, set my phone on the table, and looked at my dad. The account was created from a device registered to a Marcus James, same last name as the boy. She paused. He didn't use a VPN. The IP traces back to this address. She wrote something on a piece of paper and slid it across the table. It was our home address, my mother's house. My dad thanked her quietly and walked her to the door. He came back and sat across from me. He didn't say I told you so. He didn't perform outrage. He just looked at the piece of paper for a moment and then turned it face down. All right, he said. He made a second call that evening. A man named Sebastian arrived the following morning. Early 30s, ex-law enforcement, the kind of eyes that assessed a room the moment he entered it. Private investigator. My dad had apparently known him for years. Over the next 3 days, my dad's legal pad filled up. Names and dates and connections drawn between events that I had always experienced as separate. Sebastian came and went. Catherine sent emails. My dad made calls in his office with the door half closed. I sat in that apartment and ate the food he put in front of me and slept for the first time in weeks and tried not to think too hard about the 9 years I had spent believing he was someone who couldn't be trusted. On the third day, while my dad was out picking up groceries, my phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. A photo of my dad's car outside a downtown law firm. The message said, "Your daddy can't protect you forever." My hands shook. I deleted it. When he came home, I looked at his face. The dark circles. The jaw set in a way that hadn't relaxed since I arrived. The way he'd aged visibly in 72 hours. And I decided not to tell him. He was already carrying enough. I told myself I'd tell him later. That evening, Sebastian called. He had found Simone. She was willing to talk, but only to my dad, and not to police. Not yet. My dad drove across town that night. He came back at 1 in the morning and sat in the kitchen in the dark for a long time before he came to check that I was asleep. I was not asleep. I heard him sit down at the kitchen table. I heard the sound of a pen moving across the legal pad, and I heard, once, just once, the sound of my father crying. He didn't know I heard it. He collected himself and went to bed. The next morning, he told me what Simone had shared. She remembered more than people knew. She had been trying to decide whether to speak publicly because she was afraid of exactly the kind of social destruction that had already found me. She had noticed, that night at the party, that the boy who brought her a drink had a particular tattoo on his left forearm, a small compass rose, slightly crooked. Marcus had gotten that tattoo at 15, paid a guy $50 cash to do it illegally. I had never mentioned it to anyone, including my dad, but he had found it in a photo on Marcus's now private social media that Sebastian had archived before it disappeared. The compass rose was visible in a photo from 2 months before the party, on Marcus's left forearm, slightly crooked. My dad sat across from me at the kitchen table, the legal pad in front of him, and said, "I need to ask you something directly. Did you know about this?" "I knew about the tattoo," I said. "I didn't connect it to Simone." He nodded. "I believe you." He called our family attorney that afternoon. Then he called my mom. I was not in the room for that conversation. I heard the rise and fall of it from the hallway. When it ended, my dad came out and said, "She's coming here tomorrow morning. She's bringing Marcus." I slept maybe 2 hours. They arrived at 9. My mother in her navy blazer. Marcus in a clean shirt, hands in his pockets, jaw set in the expression he wore when he was preparing to perform innocence. He looked at me when he came through the door with a particular blankness. Not guilt, nothing so readable, just the absence of anything he might owe me. My dad stood at the kitchen counter. He had the legal pad. He had printed copies of Catherine's findings and Sebastian's report. He had the archived photo of Marcus's tattoo. He didn't raise his voice. He laid it out item by item, the way you lay out a case, which is what it was. Marcus interrupted twice. The first time to say that Catherine's evidence was circumstantial, which was technically a legal term he had no business using, but which he had clearly been preparing. The second time to look at my mom and say, "Mom, you know Adrian has always had issues. You know how he gets." I watched my mother's face when he said that. I watched her start to turn toward me with the expression I had seen 100 times, the one that meant she was about to smooth things over in Marcus's direction. And then I watched something stop her, something in the printed pages my dad had laid on the table. She had been reading them while Marcus talked. She stopped turning. I spoke for the first time since they arrived. I said, "Marcus, I know about Simone. I know about the tattoo. I know about the Instagram account. I know about Priya and the parking lot and the $40 and Mrs. Hargrove's car." I paused. I've known a lot of things for a long time. I just had no one to tell them to. The room was very quiet. Marcus looked at me, and for just a moment, half a second, the length of a single breath, the performance dropped. What was underneath it was not guilt exactly. It was something colder, the look of someone who has been outmaneuvered and is already calculating the next move. He turned to my mom and said, "I want to leave." She didn't move. "Mom," he said, sharper this time. She was still looking at the pages on the table. "Denise," my dad said quietly, "you should read page 4. Page 4 was the earliest item in Sebastian's timeline. September of 2009, Principal Dunbar's office. 2 witness statements located through the school's now digitized disciplinary records that described a boy matching Marcus's description near the staff parking lot on each of the 5 days in question. My mother read it slowly. She turned the page. She set it down. She put both hands flat on the table like she needed something solid. Marcus left the apartment without another word. He walked out, pulled the door shut quietly, and was gone. My mom sat there for another 20 minutes. My dad made coffee. Nobody said anything for a long time. Then she said, "I knew." 2 words. She wasn't looking at me. She was looking at the table. "I knew the first time," she said. "I told myself it was practical, that your record was already, that it wouldn't matter as much." She stopped, started again. "I knew. I had rehearsed this moment in 100 different versions over 9 years. In most of the versions, I said something devastating, something that landed perfectly and summed up everything she'd cost me. In the actual moment, I sat at my dad's kitchen table and felt something I hadn't expected. I felt tired. I said, 'I know you knew.' That was all I had." The weeks that followed moved in several directions at once. Sebastian submitted his findings to the school district's administration. Marcus was interviewed. Given what Simone eventually shared with a counselor, who then triggered a formal process, the investigation escalated beyond the school. I was formally cleared of any connection to Simone within 3 weeks. The Instagram account was documented in the school's report. The threats I had received were documented. A formal apology was issued by the school, which amounted to a letter from the superintendent that I still have somewhere in a drawer. Marcus was 17. The details of what happened to him legally are not mine to publish fully. What I will say is that he was not protected in the way my mother had always protected him. The systems that had been so easy to manipulate when the target was a child in a principal's office turned out to be less flexible when the evidence was this specific and the person doing the manipulating was this traceable. My mom did not speak to me for 4 months. When she did, it was a phone call that lasted 11 minutes and covered very little real ground. I told her I was living with my dad and planned to stay through graduation. She didn't argue. She said she hoped I was eating. I said I was. She said she loved me. I said okay. It was not a healing. It was a placeholder. A flag planted in a place we might return to someday, when both of us had more capacity for the conversation that actually needed to happen. My dad and I had 9 years to rebuild. It went slowly and honestly. He told me his version of the divorce, not to undermine my mother's version entirely, but to fill in the parts she had left out, the parts that were less flattering to the narrative she'd constructed. There had been no violence. There had been a woman he worked with a year before the divorce, and a period of dishonesty that my mother had never fully forgiven. When she left, she took us with her, and she took the explanation she preferred. I held both versions and tried to find the truth somewhere in the middle, which is usually where truth lives. I graduated that spring with a 3.9 GPA, accepted to Ohio State on a partial academic scholarship. I deferred for a semester to work and save, and to sit still long enough to understand what had happened to me and what I wanted to do with it. I am 23 now. I am studying psychology, which surprises no one who has heard this story. I live in Columbus still, but in a different part of it, close enough to my dad that we have dinner twice a week. I have told this story to my therapist in full over several sessions, and she has used the word parentification and the phrase scapegoat dynamic and other clinical language that I find useful, not because it absolves anyone, but because it provides architecture. It gives the thing a shape I can work around. My mother and I talk occasionally, not often. The relationship has not been repaired so much as redefined. There are things she will never fully own. There is a version of this story she will always tell slightly differently. I have made a kind of peace with that, the way you make peace with weather. It is what it is. I cannot change it. I can decide how much time I spend standing in it. Marcus and I do not speak. I do not know what his current situation is. I find that I do not need to know. What I carry from this is not bitterness. I have worked too hard on that to let it settle back in. What I carry is a precise and specific understanding of something I wish I had never had to learn this young. People who love you can still sacrifice you, not because they don't love you, because they love something else more. In my mother's case, she loved the idea of a perfect family more than she loved the truth of her actual one. She needed a son to display and a son to manage, and she made her choices accordingly, and every single one of those choices compounded until a 16-year-old boy was sitting on a bed reading his home address on a stranger's Instagram page with a phone full of threats and nowhere safe to go. She never meant for it to go that far. I believe that. It doesn't change the distance the rock traveled once she let it go. My dad asked me once, about a year after everything happened, whether I regretted not calling him sooner. I thought about it honestly before I answered. No, I said. I called when I was ready, when I had run out of everything else. He nodded. He looked out the window for a moment. Then he said, I should have tried harder to find you. I said, yeah, you should have. We sat with that for a little while. Then he got up and made coffee, and I helped, and we stood in his kitchen without saying anything, and it was the most like home I had felt in a long time. Some things get repaired. Some things just find a new shape. You learn to hold the grief and the gratitude in the same hand. You learn that the people who chose you late still chose you, and sometimes that is the version of love you get. Imperfect, delayed, but real. I still have the composition notebook, the one from under the mattress. All those dates and dollar amounts and small, careful records of things that no child should have had to document. I found it in a box when I moved out of my mom's house. I held it for a long time before I decided what to do with it. I kept it, not as evidence anymore, not as a record of grievance, just as proof that I had always known what was true. Even when nobody else would say it, I always knew.